There is something about Hamlet which appeals to A-level and pre-U examining boards. It would be a set text for paper 2 of the Cambridge pre-U English examination for the next 3 years, and so at least until 2018. In this exam, you will either need to write an essay on your Shakespeare text or refer closely to a printed passage in order to explore a key idea or relationship within the text as a whole. In order to achieve a level 6, your point of view needs to be exceptionally insightful. You need to know the play in enormous detail to be able to do this, which this video will definitely help you with. Level 6 candidates will also include perceptive and subtle exploration of the roles of form, structure and language in shaping meaning. As in my previous videos, all quotations will be shown on screen, and I would suggest jotting down the ones which particularly interest you, or which perhaps you haven't yet considered in much detail. This is vital because your exam is closed book. You need to have learned as many quotations as possible. Another key feature of the exam is that you need to have a very good understanding of the whole play and how individual moments and lines relate to wider themes and ideas. Level 6 candidates include sharply focused analysis. Finally, you need to recognise the significance of the literary, social and cultural context. For Shakespeare was, of course, writing at a very different period to our own, which we must take into account when exploring meaning. The relationship between Hamlet and his mother is a fascinating one and will vary considerably according to production. For this reason, I will include fair use clips from 2 movies of Hamlet to illuminate my discussion of their relationship. Michael Mundell's 2003 version and Michael Amoreira's 2000 film starring Ethan Hawke in the title role. I will explore Hamlet's use of subversive language when in conversation with his mother in Act 1, Scene 2, Gertrude's curiously detached attitude as a mother, and Hamlet's disturbed view of his mother's sexuality. I will suggest that Gertrude tries, unsuccessfully, to delegate parenting responsibilities, resulting in perhaps the most uncomfortable, unsettling scene between a mother and a son within any dramatic text, the closet scene of Act 3, Scene 4. Finally, I will explore the deaths of these 2 characters and suggest that it is perhaps only in the closing moments of their lives that mother and son finally develop their appallingly limited understanding of each other. So, stay tuned. This is a Schofield on Shakespeare A-level pre-U revision guide to Hamlet, focusing particularly on the dreadful relationship between Hamlet and Gertrude. The plan is for this to be useful and interesting.
Here I am on the way to the Globe in London, and my mind turns to thinking about the opening exchanges between Hamlet and his mother. Surely they suggest that Gertrude has little or no understanding of her son, or that her exciting newish relationship may have gnawed away at her inclination to empathise with him. Reacting to Hamlet's party-pooping, discordant lack of cheer, Gertrude attempts to get her boy to pull himself together with the following glib platitude: "Thou knowest 'tis common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity." Hamlet's response is opaque and gives the misleading impression of acquiescence. "Aye, madam, it is common." In these first lines, Hamlet deliberately glosses over his mother's central point, that all of us are doomed to die at some point, so get over it, and instead refers back to her previous introductory clause, which stressed the commonplace, everyday nature of death in this dismal world of ours. However, whereas Gertrude suggested that death is commonplace, Hamlet elects to refer to the saying itself. All that lives must die is a tired cliché, devoid of all real meaning. In doing so, Hamlet is clearly undermining his mother and indirectly attacking her for doling out fatuous truisms, rather than making some kind of attempt to understand and empathise, which you might expect from the mother of a son who has lost his father a few months previously. The pattern of Hamlet selectively responding to, yet ignoring the gist of his mother's words is seen throughout the play, but especially in Act 1 Scene 2 and the famous closet scene, Act 3 Scene 4. In this scene it happens again immediately after Hamlet's quibbling in relation to the word common. Gertrude, apparently encouraged by Hamlet's eye, which could signal some kind of agreement, asks her son this question: "If it be, why seems it so particular with thee?" Hamlet replies, "Seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, that can denote me truly." As I approach the Mad Hatter pub and a well-earned pint of London pride, I ponder further. Gertrude wants to know why Hamlet seems so devastated by his father's death, particularly as he appears to have accepted the premise that death is inevitable. However, Hamlet deliberately ignores her question and instead chooses to pick up on an apparently inconsequential throwaway verb, seems, contained within her sentence. He takes issue with this verb as it could imply, to an over-analytical, fraught mind at least, that he might not be genuine in his feelings of grief, and that his black clothing, heavy sighing and weeping could be a facade rather than representative of deeply held emotions, which would be great news for a mother who clearly can't be bothered with the hassle of supporting a son, hell-bent on introspection rather than moving forward. And with a couple of pints safely down the hatch, I consider more about Gertrude's use of the verb seem rather than the verb is. Doesn't it imply a certain detachment between mother and son? She hasn't cared enough to spend sufficient time with her son following the bereavement, and so cannot be sure as to whether he is as troubled inside as he seems to be on the surface. And what better place than the Globe than to consider the nuances of the relationship between the pair? But it strikes me that the fact Gertrude needs to ask her son why he is troubled, and chooses to do so on a packed stage with her new husband, Polonius, Laertes and other lords on stage, it suggests that she doesn't know him very well, or hasn't been sufficiently interested in engaging with him in recent months. However, in her defence, Hamlet's words in this section point to a rather petulant insistence on the complexity of his character and integrity of his feelings. Whilst he clearly has a detailed understanding of the different outward forms of grief, he refuses to accept that any or a combination of these forms could adequately represent his feelings, and in doing so, he comes across as a little precious about them. Accepting Hamlet's point that it is possible for someone to play at sighing and crying, isn't it correct to surmise that the majority of weepers are experiencing genuine sorrow as tears flow down their cheeks? Isn't Hamlet being rather irritatingly theatrical here in making such a grandiose point about the potential difference between appearance and reality, and thus do we the audience gain a brief insight into why his mother may not have spent sufficient time with him following his father's death? He's actually rather hard work. A few weeks and a characteristically abrupt haircut later, it's time for an eagerly awaited trip to Portugal. I think again of Hamlet. He clearly feels resentful towards his mother for her insensitive, clueless questioning within such a public forum. And although he evades her questions in Act 1, Scene 2, he clearly still wants to show her respect. When outlining the different outward forms of grief, he refers to her as good mother, and when first Claudius, then Gertrude, ask him not to go to Wittenberg, Hamlet's response is pointed. "I shall in all my best obey you, madam." The context is important here. Claudius has just given a 31-line speech to his son, and of course I use inverted commas around this word, in which he has praised Hamlet for his loyalty to his dead father, discussed the nature of grief, and offered himself up with preposterous optimism or cheek, depending on your take, as a replacement father. Gertrude follows his pompous, carefully crafted abuse of logic with a mere 2 lines imploring her son, and it is only to her that Hamlet responds. It is only her that Hamlet will obey. It is only her that Hamlet will acknowledge. So Hamlet's statement that he will obey is both a statement of respect towards his mother and a deliberate public snub towards Claudius. It is a coded affirmation of his natural loyalty towards Gertrude as his mother by birth, and rejection of someone he sees as an incestuous usurper. Michael Almereyda's partially successful movie version of the film stars Ethan Hawke in the title role, Diane Venora as Gertrude, and shifts the setting from late Middle Ages Denmark to 21st century New York. Claudius kills King Hamlet to become the king or new chief executive of Denmark Corporation, and of course Gertrude's new husband, prompting outpourings of outraged introspection from keen film student Hamlet. In this production, Gertrude seems keen to maintain the glamorous lifestyle associated with being the wife of the chief executive of Denmark Corporation. Have a look at how she persuades Hamlet not to wander off to Wittenberg and her subsequent response.
And we beseech you, bend you to remain here in the care and comfort of our eye.
Let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. Stay with us. Go not to Wittenberg.
I shall in all my best obey you, madam.
Gertrude's bottom is already planted securely in the back seat of the company limousine, and she sports designer sunglasses as she presses a button to lower down the window to speak to her son. This is not the body language, attire and behaviour of a woman who uses spare time to pray for the well-being and physical proximity of her son. In this production, there is not only an emotional chasm between mother and son, but physical too. Gertrude can't be bothered to get out of the comfort of her limousine to address her son, let alone offer him any gestures indicating maternal love and solicitude. For in Almereyda's production, Gertrude is not only enchanted by the sexual excitement of a new relationship, something I will explore later in this video, but enthralled to the materialistic benefits available to those in the most senior positions within capitalist, consumerist corporations. She has even more distractions than Shakespeare's original character to increase the distance between herself and her only child. Hamlet may use respectful forms and terms towards his mother in public, but in private he reveals just how disillusioned he is with her rapid remarriage. Alone on stage, he refers back to the relationship between his parents when his father was alive, and marvels why she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. Frailty, thy name is woman. And so his parents, according to him, used to have a very close, touchy-feely relationship. With food, if you have too much of something, after a period of time you become nauseous and sick at the sight of, for example, the tub of ice cream or family-sized slab of chocolate. But with Gertrude, the opposite was true. The more time she spent with King Hamlet, the more she wanted to spend time with him. Hamlet remembers all too clearly that his mother used to dote on his father, and so cannot get his head around the fact she has seemingly, there's that word again, forgotten him so quickly. But what is interesting here is that Hamlet draws a general conclusion about women, seemingly based solely on his mother's behaviour. He concludes, frailty, thy name is woman, which poses questions about his attitude towards women, which must in turn influence the way we view his relationship with his mother. What is Hamlet saying here? Is he saying that women in general are so weak and frail that they simply cannot survive without a husband to lead and guide them? that they are so weak and frail that they will invariably be prepared to upset children by remarrying rapidly so as to avoid ending up terrifyingly alone and vulnerable. But the fact that Hamlet has the confidence and audacity to draw a damning conclusion about women in general from his mother's behaviour smacks of misogyny and an impotent desire to control. He fails to understand why his mother has behaved in a certain way, and the only way he can deal with this is to condemn the entire female species, and by reallocating power within his syntax from women to the less terrifying abstract term of frailty. And as Hamlet continues to pour out his despair on stage, he shows the extent to which he feels uncomfortable and disgusted by thoughts of his mother daring to assert her sexuality outside of the original society-sanctioned family unit, weakly allowing his mind to conjure up images that the vast majority of non-messed-up children would be uncomfortable with. He moans, "Oh, most wicked speed to pose with such dexterity to incestuous sheets." Until the early 20th century, both the Catholic and Protestant churches forbade marriage to a deceased husband's brother, and so Hamlet's outraged adjective incestuous refers to both the uncomfortably close family link between the new couple and the fact it is illegal. However, it is the reference to sheets which I find most interesting, as it alludes to the specific place where Gertrude and Claudius will lie to sleep and have sex. Sheets is the final climactic word in the sentence, and the fact that Hamlet refers to this detail rather than rage generally on remarriage shows that he has developed an unhealthy obsession with his mother's sexuality and nighttime sexual activities. In Michael Almereyda's production, the keen film student Hamlet watches old clips of his mother and father together as he reflects on the extraordinary changes of the past few months.
So loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet within a month. Let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere these shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body like Niobe all tears. Why, she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left a flushing in her gullet eyes, she married. Oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets.
Whereas in Shakespeare's original, we have to take Hamlet's word for it that his mother used to hang devotedly onto his father. And we need to bear in mind that many children may have a tendency to romanticize the relationships of their parents, particularly perhaps when one has passed away. In Almereyda's production, we see evidence of it. Hamlet plays archive film footage on his laptop, and we see Gertrude smiling happily, leaning her head onto King Hamlet's shoulders. The effect of this is to make the audience empathise even more with young Hamlet's pain and judge Gertrude slightly more harshly than in Shakespeare's original. We've seen it. There's film evidence that Gertrude had gloriously happy moments of physical intimacy with Hamlet's father. So why did she remarry so quickly? And why is she leaving her son so isolated as he struggles to cope?
I'm now standing outside our hotel in Alvor on the Algarve, keen to consider this question in more detail. Well, Gertrude herself clearly recognises her own failure to understand her son, and although this doesn't appear to bother her unduly, her passing on of the parenting baton to others does show a degree of solicitude towards Hamlet. In Act 2, Scene 2, this metaphorical parenting baton is passed on to the hapless duo of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Gertrude cries, "Sure I am, 2 men there are not living to whom he most adheres. I beseech you instantly to visit my too much changed son." Whilst there is nothing particularly wrong with getting old friends to check on troubled offspring, and Hamlet does seem to welcome them enthusiastically later in the scene, Gertrude's request does indirectly highlight her own failings to get to the bottom as to why her son has changed so much. Moreover, it is Claudius who welcomes the pair first. "The need we have for you did provoke our hasty sending," he declares ceremoniously and rather bluntly for a modern taste. "Our" may refer to himself and Gertrude, but given his predilection for the royal we, it seems more likely that he came up with the plan to summon Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and his wife agreed that it would be a good idea. If this is the case, and Gertrude's passivity is seen throughout the play in a number of ways, then Gertrude comes across as an even more indifferent parent. She doesn't understand her son, she doesn't have any ideas what to do with his peculiar behaviour, and she quickly agrees when someone else comes up with a plan which may shed some kind of light on this peculiar behaviour. In Alma Rader's production, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern report back to the King and Queen via a telephone call. Gertrude's passivity and detachment from her son is highlighted in her body language and behaviour as she listens to Hamlet's childhood friends describing his crafty madness.
And can you by no drift of confidence get from him why he puts on this confusion, grading so harshly all his days of quiet with turbulence and dangerous lunacy?
Does confess he feels himself distracted, but from what cause he will in no means speak. Nor do we find him forward to be sounded, but with a crafty madness keeps aloof when we would bring him on to some confession of his true state.
Did he receive you well?
Most like a gentleman, but with much forcing of his disposition. Niggard of question, but of our demands, most free in his reply.
Thank you, Rosencrantz and gentle Guildenstern.
Thank you, Guildenstern and gentle Rosencrantz.
We lay our service freely at your feet.
As Claudius questions whether the men can, by no drift of conference, get from him why he puts on this confusion, grating his days with lunacy, the director shows an extreme close-up of Gertrude's face. She's heavily made up with bright red lipstick. We can see part of her bare shoulder, but no clothing, and viewers of a certain lusty disposition may well speculate that she is naked. The camera then switches to a long shot, which shows Gertrude is indeed wearing clothes, a very pretty scarlet petticoat, whilst Claudius is winding down from the office in open formal shirt and trousers. Whilst Rosencrantz describes Hamlet's refusal to explore his own feelings, Gertrude massages her lover's back with her tootsies before moving towards him and straddling him. With one petticoat strap falling tantalisingly down her shoulder and a quick sip of champers, it is clear Gertrude is really only interested in one thing at this moment, and it isn't her son. And so in this production, Hamlet's fears about his mother's sexuality are fair. She is a great lover of sex, and unfortunately it comes at the expense of a half-decent mother-son relationship. In Shakespeare's text, it is more ambiguous. Hamlet explains the main purpose of staging the mousetrap at the end of Act 2, Scene 2. The play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. By reenacting Claudius's ear poisoning of his father on stage, Hamlet hopes to be able to discern signs of guilt on his uncle, and thus categorically confirm whether the ghost of Act 1, Scene 5 was the spirit of his father, and not a devil with a pleasing shape. However, both Gertrude and Claudius are invited to watch the play, and Hamlet takes the opportunity to encourage his mother to reflect on her behaviour and first marriage as she watches the action unfold. The player queen repeatedly stresses her own devotion to her first husband, and according to Hamlet, Gertrude used to act similarly, and gushes sanctimoniously, "The instances that second marriage move are base respects of thrift, but none of love. The second time I kill my husband dead, when second husband kisses me in bed." Hamlet clearly hopes that these words will prompt his mother to reflect and consider the idea that remarriage, let alone such a rapid remarriage, dishonours the memory of the first husband, and so much so it metaphorically kills the already deceased. Hamlet is a production of the original union, and so by extension the act of dishonour encompasses him as well, And unlike his father, he is still on earth to witness his mother's shamefully demeaning behaviour. And as well as presumably alternating his keen eye between Claudius and Gertrude on stage, he asks his mother this apparently innocent question: "Madam, how like you this play?" His mother responds, "The lady protests too much, methinks." The player queen has repeatedly referred to the everlasting brightness of her relationship with her husband. In addition to the suggestion that a second husband's kiss equates to murder, she later vows, "If once a widow, ever I be wife, and never come mischance between us twain." And so Gertrude's comment about the lady protesting too much can be read in two ways. Firstly, it shows that she has guessed what will happen. The woman has said so many times that she won't remarry and relove that it is bound to happen, if only to maintain dramatic momentum. But secondly, Gertrude, recognising the obvious parallels between herself and the player queen, is archly, indirectly defending her own behaviour. Why is it, she seems to be saying, does the player queen feel the need to state her never-ending love and devotion for her husband, irrespective of future circumstances, so many times? Do genuinely held feelings of love and dedication need to be hammered home quite so much? And can such excess imply potential insincerity? Gertrude's comments seems to argue for realism and restraint within life and relationships. Circumstances can change, people can change, feelings can change, and so it is foolish to come out with spur of the moment, love is a fairy tale guff, even when you are experiencing great happiness within a relationship. Michael Mundell's 2003 video version of Hamlet stars William Houston as Hamlet and Gillian Bond as Gertrude, whereas the previously discussed Almereyda version shifts the setting with partial success to modern-day New York. Mundell tries to recreate a reasonably faithful to the original medieval ambience. Look at how Bond's Gertrude responds to her son's attempts to get her to reflect on perceived past misdemeanours.
If once a widow, ever I be a wife.
Madam, how like you this play?
The lady doth protest too much, methinks.
Gertrude makes assured eye contact with Hamlet as he asks his innocent question and gives a little patronising smile as she replies with worldly wisdom, "The lady doth protest too much, methinks." This Gertrude can hold her head up high and is serene in her conscience. She is the more experienced parent figure to her son and has no intention of being made to feel guilty by some kind of elaborate charade, thus confirming the audience's feelings that she has no idea that Claudius killed her first husband. Ethan Hawke's Hamlet in Almereyda's 2000 film is likewise desperate to get a reaction, not just out of Claudius, but his mother. In this film, The Mousetrap is a movie of his own making, made up initially of various 1950s black and white family clips. Have a look at an extract. Whereas in Shakespeare's original, the player king and queen gush about their undying love for each other, here Hamlet focuses on the wider family unit of husband, wife, father, mother, son. In the clips, the happily married couple sit companionably on the sofa and jointly look after and dote on their angelic-looking young son. The effect of this is to illustrate the wider damage caused by the new relationship. Not only has it called into question the sincerity of the first marriage, was it just a sham, but has ripped the entire family unit apart, one which was previously so happy. Hamlet's inclusion of these family scenes in The Mousetrap also slightly alters the way we view him. In Shakespeare's original, Hamlet has merely asked a group of actors to play the murder of Gonzago, for which he has added some dozen or 16 lines of his own invention. However, in this interpretation, Hamlet would have spent hours and hours on his own, finding, mixing, then editing his own film clips to create the movie, thus emphasising his own isolated, lonely, geeky position. The fact he includes happy family clips in which the child is around 4 years old makes him seem self-pityingly immature. Hawke was 29 when he played Hamlet in this film. The viewer may well conclude that at this age he should be concerned with more adult matters than nostalgically resurrecting the distant past, thus making us sympathise with Gertrude, who has to try to connect with such a childish adult son. In this production, Hamlet doesn't just incorporate idyllic moments from family life within his mousetrap, but some passionate kissing and lovemaking from the 1972 porn movie Deep Throat. Gertrude is clearly deeply uncomfortable and shocked by the inclusion of this scene, and flinches and looks away. Such overt sexuality is not included in Shakespeare's original Mousetrap, which first focuses on the apparent devotion between player king and queen before player Lucianus, nephew to the king, comes on stage and pours poison into the player king's ears. We are not shown the development of the relationship between the player queen and player Lucianus, as Claudius gets up to leave following Hamlet's revelation that you shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzago's wife. The Hamlet of Shakespeare's original play finds thoughts of his mother's sexuality disturbing, as seen in his earlier references to incestuous sheets, and also in the crude imagery he employs in Act 3, Scene 4, in order to force a reaction out of his mother. However, Almereyde's inclusion of frantic snogging and shagging within the Mousetrap makes Hamlet seem even more obsessed with his mother's sexuality than in the original, whilst the seamless integration of porn movie material within this production accentuates the impression we have of this Hamlet. Not only does his interest in filming and filmmaking facilitate introspective, unhealthy nostalgia for the past, as seen in his viewing of archive film footage which shows Gertrude leaning happily on King Hamlet's shoulders, but, even more dangerously, a warped view of female sexuality. When exploring Act 1, Scene 2, I explored the idea that Hamlet wants to remain respectful towards his mother, but his conscience and introspective personality will not allow him to respond to her platitudes with platitudes of his own, which may falsely imply his acceptance of the new family unit. Following the abruptly terminated production of The Mousetrap, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern returned to Hamlet to relay a message from his mother, with Hamlet deliberately equivocating and hence showing his distaste for his old friends' newly acquired roles as puppets. Rosencrantz eventually blurts out, "Then thus," she says, "your behaviour has struck her into amazement and admiration." Hamlet's response is, "Oh, wonderful son, that can so astonish a mother. But is there no sequel at the heels of this other's admiration? Impart." As throughout much of the play, Hamlet's words show his refusal to conform to convention and expectation. The expected response to being told that your behaviour has left your mother bewildered and astonished would be to profess concern, possibly even regret. Yet Hamlet resorts to sarcastic exclamation, referring to himself as a wonderful son, and mockingly personifies his mother's admiration by giving them heels, thus flippantly showing that he knows a summoning to be told off is imminent. Hamlet's tone may be equivocatory and mocking when responding to his mother's words as delivered by the irritating go-betweens of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but as in Act 1, Scene 2, he comes across as awkward and theatrical rather than directly disrespectful towards his mother. His soliloquy at the end of Act 3, Scene 2 emphasises the difficult position he is in. On the one hand, he needs to get his mother to appreciate what she has done wrong. Yet, as a son, He has certain filial obligations it would be unnatural to disregard. He cries out on stage, "O heart, lose not thy nature. Let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom. Let me be cruel, not unnatural." Nero was a ruthless Roman emperor who ordered the murder of his mother, Agrippina, in 59 AD. Although in the early years of his reign, she wielded enormous power and influence over him. Hamlet's imagery hints that he feels so furious with his mother that he could lose control and potentially kill her, something which he recognises would be abhorrent and unnatural as her son. Hamlet makes the same point in his subsequent line when he vows, "I will speak daggers to her, but use none." The reference to daggers, hot blood, and a murderous Roman emperor emphasise Hamlet's volatile state of mind at this point in the play. His production of the mousetrap has confirmed the ghost his father's veracity and Claudius's guilt, leaving him in an aroused state of excitement. Yet the presence of this soliloquy highlights Hamlet's respect for his mother. He can recognise these heat-induced impulsive desires in himself, and so he forces himself to stop, take stock of the situation, and issue himself with instructions so that he remains a natural, albeit telling it as it is son, irrespective of the circumstances. And when Hamlet is alone with Gertrude, or so he thinks initially in Act 3, Scene 4, he is true to his vows to maintain a degree of filial loyalty by speaking daggers rather than using them. Gertrude starts the exchange with some daggers of her own, but is characteristically repelled by her son's swift manipulation of her language. "Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended," she starts sharply, only for her son to mimic back, "Mother, you have my father much offended." Gertrude attempts to maintain parental authority with the riposte, "Come, come, you answer with an idle tongue," only for Hamlet to retort, "Go, go, you question with a wicked tongue." These exchanges show Hamlet being far more explicitly critical of his mother's behaviour than previously. Whereas in Act 1, Scene 2, Hamlet chose to quibble with words such as common and seems to show an indirect scorn for her comments and questions. Here, he transforms her criticisms of him into unambiguous censure of her own behaviour. His seamless use of so much of his mother's syntax, he switches mother for Hamlet, you for thou, and my for thy, but otherwise keeps the sentence exactly the same, results in a direct, claustrophobic, condensed attack on his mother, which clearly initially offends her, as shown in the indignant repetition of the imperative come and the reference to his idle tongue. However, Hamlet repeats the same technique in his subsequent response, this time switching come, come to go, go, answer to question, and idle to wicked. The efficient ease with which Hamlet repackages his mother's words shows his verbal dominance over her. Try as she might, she is unable to assert any natural parental authority over him, and this is exactly as Hamlet intends. The killing of King Hamlet has shattered the traditional roles and values of the family unit and allows him to break free from traditional obligations. If the brother-in-law can unnaturally marry a sister, then a son can most certainly take on the role of parent to erring mother. For Hamlet feels his mother lacks self-understanding, and that he must be the person to forcefully thrust and propel this knowledge inside her. With Gertrude presumably edging hopefully towards the door, he orders, "Come, come, and sit you down. You shall not budge, you go not till I set up a glass where you see the inmost part of you." In Mundell's 2003 production, Hamlet backs up his words with actions and physically restrains his mother from leaving by dragging her onto the beds.
You shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you.
What will thou do? Thou wilt not murder me! Help! Help!
A rat! Dead for a jackal! Die!
Whilst restraining Gertrude, Hamlet pushes her onto the bed and lies on top of her, with his legs astride of her body. The position has unmistakable sexual undertones and unwittingly highlights Hamlet's impotent, desperate desire not just to get his mother to reflect on her past behaviour, but to assert control over her sexuality. Even the killing of Polonius doesn't sway Hamlet from his fixed purpose of educator-in-chief, and he uses imagery and hyperbole to hammer home the extraordinary contrast in greatness, stature and dignity between his father and Claudius, hence Gertrude's appalling weakness in submitting to the latter's advances. Look here upon the pictures. See what a grace was seated on his brow, Hyperion's curls, the front of Jove himself, an eye like Mars to threaten or command, a station like the herald Mercury new lighted on a heaven-kissing hill. Hamlet hyperbolically refers to his father in terms of the greatest and most powerful gods. Hyperion was the Titan, god of light. Jove was the king of the gods, Mars the god of war, and Mercury the messenger of the gods. And in doing so, he shows his bitter hurt at his mother's apparent blind disregard for such greatness, and his own possibly intensified by grief, retrospective hero worshipping of his father. For Hamlet feels that his mother has shown a terrible lack of judgment in succumbing to Claudius. Not only has she debased herself by linking up with someone who isn't even a pale shadow of his godlike father, but she has allowed feeble, middle-aged sexual desire to take precedence over age-acquired wisdom. Hamlet continues his rant. Have you eyes? You cannot call it love, for at your age their heyday in the blood is tame, it's humble, and waits upon the judgment. And what judgment would step from this to this?
These words reveal Hamlet's preconceptions and, yes, prejudices about the nature of love and desire. He suggests that at his mother's age, the heyday in the blood is tame. The intense state of sexual excitement characteristic of youth has calmed. By choosing to pursue carnal, animalistic pleasures, Hamlet feels Gertrude has unforgivably ignored the nobler impulses generated by experience and reason, and shown herself to be more like a wild animal than a civilized human being. He continues his tirade with a graphic, warped description of his mother having sex. Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an unseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty. This is disgusting imagery. Unseamed means soaked with grease, whilst the reference to a sty conjures up images of snorting filth and pigs frantically feeding from troughs. Yet Hamlet is talking about his mother, and painting a verbal picture of her naked in her bed, dripping with perspiration, having sex in a pit of filth. On the one hand, Hamlet feels compelled to be so graphic in order to awaken his mother's conscience and awareness of the consequences of her actions. The ghost may refer to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her, but if this is true, Gertrude is remarkably good at keeping these pricks of conscience to herself. However, the fact Hamlet is so graphic and so frequently makes reference to his mother's sexual activity, both within soliloquy and here in Act 3, Scene 4, suggests that there is something unresolved in his relationship with his mother. Freud's Oedipus complex explores the possibility of a child experiencing sexual desire for a parent, which can potentially continue into adult life, leaving repressed desires which are more likely to surface during times of heightened crisis. Whilst I am sceptical about this theory, there is no question that Hamlet cannot deal with the idea of his mother pursuing energetic sexual fulfillment outside of the original family unit. I am not convinced this is because he himself sexually desires Gertrude, but I do feel he feels threatened and overwhelmed by his thoughts of female sexuality in general, as also seen in his exchanges with Ophelia, and he is desperate to exert some control over this, although he knows that this is impossible. This deep discomfort with female, and especially his mother's sexuality, is emphasised in the two film productions I have been exploring, when Hamlet explosively rips away the covers from his mother's bed. Here's William Houston as Hamlet getting rather upset with his mother in the 2003 film.
Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty stye.
Speak to me no more! These words like daggers entering mine ears, no more, sweetheart!
A murderer and a villain.
In large chunks of the play, Hamlet feels paralysed by his failure to act, to do anything in response to the appalling murder of his father and the ghost's request for him to bear it not. Whilst I am uncomfortable with the oversimplicity of Laurence Olivier's add-on voiceover in his 1948 version of the play, there is no doubt that Hamlet does experience moments of self-loathing as he, like a whore, unpacks his heart with words rather than heroic, vengeful actions. Here in Mundell's version, Hamlet's impotence, both in terms of gaining revenge and, if you agree with Oedipus complex theorists, his failure to sleep with his mother, is highlighted in the frenzied, deeply frustrated way he pulls up the sheets, hurls cushions in the air and onto the floor while spouting about honeying, stewed corruption and nasty stye. Yes, Hamlet can grapple with complex ideas and emotions through powerful, evocative language, but this is, pathetically, all he can do, the director seems to be suggesting. Ethan Hawke's Hamlet is even more vigorous when it comes to pulling off his mother's sheets, and therefore, on a practical level, making it slightly more difficult for her to resume intimate relations with his uncle.
Oh, shame! Where is thy blush? I live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, honeying, making love over the nasty stye. No more! God! A camp felon! A murderer! A king of shreds and patches!
I have previously explored the idea of a mother-son role reversal, and Hamlet taking on the parent role of educating the misguided child. In this production, Almereyda emphasises this visually by having Hamlet enclose his mother within a white sheet and hold her closely against him, almost cradling her like a baby in his frenzied rage. This subconsciously represents Hamlet's inner, unachievable fantasies of a forced return to innocence for his mother, thus cleansing his mind of morbid thoughts about her insatiable, sweaty sexuality. The key point of Act 3, Scene 4 is that Hamlet is successful in educating his erring child mother. She acknowledges her guilt, not in the murder of King Hamlet, but in the evils of her hasty marriage. O Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turn'st mine eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their tinct. However, Gertrude's subsequent question and comments are revealing. What shall I do? She asks limply, and I wonder whether this feeble question sums up her character, and hence sheds light onto her unsatisfactory relationship with her son. This question suggests that Gertrude finds thinking for herself difficult, struggles when it comes to taking any kind of initiative. Hamlet has forcefully revealed to her the immorality of her current position, and now she has no idea what to do next. Certainly, she is in a difficult position. After all, this enlightenment has arrived with her already married to the big bad guy, and not during their courtship. Yet the lack of any extended exploration of her position and options, combined with the feebleness of this question, imply to me that she is a woman and a mother who likes to have others to do her thinking for her, who likes to have an easy option to follow, hence her delegating of parenting to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and her complacent mimicking of Claudius's decrees. No wonder Hamlet, the deep thinker, the intellectual, the man of words, finds her frustrating and has to resort to crude shock tactics to get some kind of response out of her. Hamlet, now established in his position as parent, does answer Gertrude's question about what she should do. After all, he has to accept her inherent passivity. However, it is notable that his instructions are in the negative. He says what she shouldn't do, suggesting that even after his mother's acknowledgement of her wrongdoing, he cannot escape debilitating thoughts of her perceived to be insatiable sexuality. He cries, Not this by no means, that I bid you do. Let the bloke king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him for a pair of reachy kisses make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft. The syntax in Hamlet's initial response is fascinating and revealing. He can't answer the question directly, but instead tortures himself by listing the negative clause first. Not this, by no means, which allows him to follow that with a positive clause, which almost seems to endorse the sexual flippancies between his mother and his uncle. Let the bloke king tempt you again to bed. Hamlet may not have Gertrude's difficulties when it comes to thinking for himself, but his syntax here shows that he is not always able to channel his thoughts into healthy, positive directions, and this clearly affects the clarity of his relationship with his mother. Hamlet's lack of clarity is highlighted in Almereyda's peculiar splitting of this scene. Rather like my own tendency to change location after every paragraph in a feeble attempt to maintain interest, Almereyda has Hamlet drag Polonius's body out of his mother's posh apartment before telephoning her from a corridor, having remembered some important detail.
I will bestow him, and will answer well the death I gave him. One word more, good lady.
What shall I do?
Not this. By no means that I bid you do. Let the bloated king tempt you again to bed. Pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him for a pair of reachy kisses make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft.
Be thou assured, if words are made of breath, and breath of life, I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me.
Although it is possible the director has cut some of Hamlet's body dragging, it does seem that he leaves Gertrude's apartment, goes round the corner before getting out a coin to call her again, which is rather bizarre. Why doesn't he just spend 10 seconds returning to her to speak in person? However, Almereyda's change does have the advantage of emphasising the impossibility of Hamlet's desire to control his mother. Sex between two people happens in private with, in general, no one else present. If you are in the same physical space as two people, yes, you can probably stop them making love, or at least delay it until you leave. However, when you telephone someone, you can only hear their voice. They can always potentially be doing other things at the same time, as is the case in this film when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern telephone Claudius to report on Hamlet. Gertrude kind of listens in, but is far more concerned with resuming vigorous sexual endeavour, which you may not be completely aware of, let alone control. Hamlet's beseeching of his mother not to bed his uncle whilst on the telephone to her brings home to the audience his own desperation and the futility of his warped desire to control her sexuality. Gertrude's exchange with Claudius in Act 4, Scene 1 reveals that she has taken Hamlet's words on board and is keen to protect him. Her renewed bond with her son, however, inevitably comes at a cost, the beginning of the disintegration of her relationship with her husband. Quizzed about the death of Polonius, Gertrude refers to her son as mad as the sea and winds and narrates disingenuously, in his lawless fit, behind the arras, hearing something stir, he whips his rapier out and cries, "A rat! A rat!" In some aspects, this is quite true. Hamlet does cry, "How now, a rat?" And he does so after hearing something stir behind the curtain. But crucially, Gertrude neglects to admit that the only reason Polonius cries out is because she has called for help and squealed, "Thou wilt not murder me," to her son. Moreover, Her simile about Hamlet's madness is willfully incorrect and shows that, for the time being at least, she has followed her son's plea for her not to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness but mad in craft. This is the first moment in the play when Gertrude has taken an active maternal role towards her son. Previously, it has been entirely passive, whether it be in echoing Claudius's supposedly concerned questions to Hamlet in Act 1, Scene 2, or reinforcing the same man's words when commanding Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's intervention in Act 2, Scene 2 and Act 3, Scene 1. Gertrude also shows her maternal love for her son by putting an extremely misleading spin on his reaction to Polonius's death. Once again making reference to the madness that Claudius so distrusts, she suggests that his madness, like some ore among a mineral of metal's base, shows itself pure. He weeps for what is done. Gertrude is trying desperately to suggest here that Hamlet's goodness shines even within his madness. He has in his soul a vein of precious metal, gold perhaps, which shows his inner goodness and purity by making him weep over Polonius's death, even whilst he struggles with the ravages of insanity. Yet this account is utter nonsense. At no point does Hamlet seem to weep or show bitter regret for killing Polonius. In Act 3, Scene 4, he wheels off unsympathetic adjectives to describe the dead man as a wretched, rash, intruding fool, and unceremoniously declares that he'll lug the guts into the neighbour room. The verb lug would be more commonly used to describe pulling heavy sackloads of produce, rather than a human being, whilst reducing Ophelia's father into the nutshell of guts is unquestionably disrespectful. Hamlet's behaviour in this scene shows that he is far more concerned with educating his mother and somehow revenging his father than the death of a meddling snoop. So Gertrude lies, and in doing so shows her forging love for her son at the comparative cost of her own now diminished and tainted relationship with Claudius. Indeed, some self-interested, spirited scorn about Laertes and his followers in Act 4, Scene 5 aside, Gertrude uses the final scenes of the play to confirm her switched allegiance from Claudius to her son. In Act 5, Scene 2, she contradicts him not once, but twice. And remember, this is a woman who has spent the majority of the play seeking easy options. Firstly, Gertrude ignores Claudius's pleas not to drink from the poisoned cup prepared for Hamlet. "I will, my lord, I pray you pardon me." In Mundell's production, Gertrude's swig of wine seems to be because she wants a quick alcoholic boost during her son's bout, and she wants to formally drink to his prospective triumph.
Our son will win.
He's hot, scant of breath. Here's a napkin, wipe thy brow. The queen carouses to thy fortune, Hamlet.
Gertrude, do not drink!
I will, my lord. I pray you pardon me.
Her tone is defiant as she refuses to follow Claudius's instructions. She wants to publicly show her support for her dear son and doesn't appear to have any idea that the cup is poisoned. This is a Gertrude who has decided to come out of her husband's shadow, who is no longer prepared to acquiesce with all his decisions, and at long last, seems prepared to elevate the role of mother ahead of newly and excitingly married wife. Hamlet smiles fondly at his mother as she gulps, and there is a moment of rapport and understanding between them, the conflict of the closet scene temporarily forgotten. By contrast, in Almereyda's production, the camera shows an increasing number of shots of Gertrude glancing suspiciously at the cup from the corner of her eye. When she drinks, she knows what she's doing. She frantically and actively runs to take the cup from Claudius, snatches it from him, and drinks quickly and defiantly.
Set me the stoops of wine upon the table. The king drinks to Hamlet. Stay. Give me drink. Give him the cup.
I'll play this bout first. Set it aside a while.
Our son shall win.
Hamlet, take my napkin. Rub thy brows. The queen carouses to thy fortune, Hamlet. I pray you, pardon me. Come. Let me wipe thy face.
In this production, Gertrude moves full circle from indifferent mother to a mother prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for her son. She's worked out that the cup is poisoned, and by drinking it, she is dying for the son she loves. So how can we sum up the relationship between Hamlet and Gertrude? Well, at the beginning of the play, the pair are divided by the mother's curious inability to empathise with her son. Gertrude is a distant, preoccupied parent and seemingly unable or unwilling to comprehend her son's black mood or clothing. Hamlet generally remains respectful towards his mother, but acquires a degree of solace in his subversion of her language. In the famous closet scene of Act 3, Scene 4, Hamlet uses graphic language and shock tactics in order to propel understanding of her demeaned, disgraced position into his mother. It seems to work to some extent, and the play ends with Gertrude supporting her son during his doomed bout with Laertes, and, consciously or unconsciously, dying to save him. However, the lasting impression is of a mother and son who never really understood or got each other. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare A-Level Pre-U revision guide to Hamlet, focusing particularly on the relationship between Hamlet and Gertrude. Many thanks for watching.